welcome to Grand Rapids City Planning Commission on April 25, 2024. We will proceed through our business today. Our typical case, we'll invite a planner to come up and present the case to us and take questions from us. Then we'll invite the applicant up to share anything they would like to add about the case and take questions from the commission. And then we'll open up the public hearing and invite anyone who would like to comment on the case to come up to the microphone, introduce themselves, and have up to 3 minutes to share their perspectives on the case. And then we'll invite the applicant back up for a last chance to say what they would like to say. And then the commission will deliberate and make their decision. We have 2 cases and then a presentation from some Grand Valley students, which we look forward to. And commissioners, does anybody have any conflicts of interest with today's cases?
I have a potential conflict with 1639 Madison. Amplified GR is not listed on the actual application, but in the project narrative and on the renderings they are, and I'm currently working on some projects for them. So I'm not working on this project specifically, but I am working with Amplified GR.
I can go through the conflicts of interest if you'd like.
Please.
The definition of a conflict, if it's issuing, deliberating, and voting on a case concerning him or her. Deliberating, voting, issuing a case concerning work that is land owned by him or her, which is adjacent. Issuing, deliberating on, voting on, or reviewing a case involving a corporation, company, partnership, or any other entity in which he or she is part owner, or any other relationship where he or she may stand to have a financial gain or loss. Issuing, deliberating on, voting on, or reviewing a case which is an action which results in financial benefit to him or her. Issuing, deliberating on, voting on, or reviewing a case concerning his or her spouse, children, stepchildren, grandchildren, parents, brothers, sisters, grandparents, parents-in-law, or members of his or her household. And finally, issuing, deliberating on, or voting on, or reviewing a case where his or her employee or employer is an applicant or agent for an applicant or has direct interest in the outcome.
Maybe that last one.
Issuing, deliberating on, or voting on, or reviewing a case where his or her employee or employer is an applicant or agent for an applicant or has a direct interest in the outcome.
So what you're saying is that your employer has a stake in the outcome of...
Not this case, though.
Not this, okay. Then
In that case, I would say I
Isn't
would
it?
make a motion that you do not have a conflict, I think.
I would second that.
I was just going to clarify real quick that I think the word outcome in the bylaws refers to the outcome of this case, which I think is what the discussion was. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
So there's a motion that Commissioner Swem does not have a conflict with this case. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Okay, no conflict. Thank you. I should have mentioned staff has prepared for the commissioners some recommended language for us to consider if we choose to either approve or deny each case. So sometimes we read information when we make our resolution, but it is in no way a foregone conclusion in either direction. So our first case is 2037 South Division.
Our first case today is 2037 South Division. It is a request for a ground floor office in the TN-TBA zone district. The zoning ordinance states that any office within 20 feet of a front lot line abutting a neighborhood business or urban center street requires special land use approval. In this case, South Division Avenue is a neighborhood business street, and that's why we're here for your consideration today. The property is located on the west side of Division, at the corner between Cutler and Division Avenue, just 1 block south of Burton. The area may look familiar. Recently, a case was before you to approve the property across the street for use by the Diatribe Community Center, and that is directly across the street on Division Avenue here. The area is a traditional business area by the master plan, and also it is within the South Division area-specific plan. Uses identified in the area-specific plan, recommendations include adaptive reuse of the existing building stock for a mix of uses that support the business district. The subject property is a single-story brick building. It has, I think, 3 separate units. It's completely improved. There is no parking on the site. The 2 units adjacent to South Division are traditional storefront units. As you can see in this image, the unit that's highlighted in red is the proposed office use. It was most recently Durant Custom Upholstery. There are no exterior changes proposed with this new use. All of the improvements will occur inside the building. If you have questions about the improvements, the applicant can answer some of those questions. This is an image showing the layout of the building as a whole. The area that's highlighted in blue will be the 1,360 square foot office for this use. Regarding use, it will be for a social service organization. It will be their general administration office. They won't be providing social services from this location. 5 to 7 employees are anticipated, and the hours of operation will be 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. In the staff report, I indicated 7, but I double-checked today, and it looks like it is 8 to 5, so normal business hours during the week. Relative to parking, 4 parking spaces are required for this use. The previous use for the upholstery service had the same number of parking spaces required. Although there is no parking available on this site, there's no waiver required for this request because it's the same number of parking spaces as the previous user. There's a, just behind the site to the west off of Cutler, there is a city-owned surface parking lot with, as you can see from this image, plenty of available parking. There's also on-street parking on Division and Cutler, and Division and Burton are both serviced by the Rapid. The applicant has submitted a summary of engagement efforts you find in your packet. They've reached out to the Burton Heights Business Association and the Garfield Park Neighborhood Association. Staff has not been in receipt of any correspondence about this project from the public. So for today's consideration is the office use in the TBA zone district on Division Street and the appropriateness of the office use within the business district. Are there any questions for me?
Any questions for Laura? Okay, thank you. We'll invite the applicant up to share any additional information you would like to about the case.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Laura very nicely made some of the points that I was going to make, so I'll just say thank you for your consideration and allow Allison, who is the potential tenant office user, to briefly explain why they want to be here.
Thank you today to all of you for your consideration and all the work you do for my city. I work as the Deputy Executive Director of ASJ. I'm here with Kyle Maynard-Skop, who's our Executive Director. And ASJ has 2 office spaces. One is in Honduras with about 80 Honduran employees, and one is in Grand Rapids with about 5 to 7 employees. And this Grand Rapids space is the one we hope to use at 2037 Division. Like she mentioned, 8 to 5 normal business hours for our small team here. And when we were searching for a new office space, the Burton Heights neighborhood was high on our list because as part of our 10-year strategic plan is community engagement in the U.S. and looking at the cutting-edge justice work that we're doing in Honduras by my Honduran coworkers, and how can that help inform systems in the U.S., including systems in the Burton Heights neighborhood that people are affected by every day. So we're really excited about that opportunity, and we know that in order to do justice work, we need to be in close community with those who most experience injustice. And look to their leadership to help inform our understanding of that. So I think this office space will allow for that. When we did our community visit with Leonard, we met, I'd say 20 to 30 of our neighbors, started great conversations, and already had a lot of ideas of things that the neighborhood would love to see and love to collaborate on. So we're very excited about that. And thank you again for your consideration.
Any questions for the applicant?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you have any kind of more detail about the internal site plan or layout than what was provided in our packet. Mostly the crux of my question is just ensuring that based on the layout, like transparency will be maintained in the front and things like that.
Yes, I don't know if there's pictures, but we do have detailed floor plans from our architect. The storefront glass will remain, I believe it will be upgraded, so you'll be able to see in through that, and there will be a larger conference room and then a smaller private meeting room, along with a bathroom and kitchenette more towards the back. But there will be one whole side of that long thing will kind of be an open hallway going towards the back.
Cool, thank you. And then in terms of handling trash, are you just going to use a cart or what?
Yes, a cart. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just,
sorry.
the signage, is that something that just goes through staff, or is there a signage plan as a part of this?
The signage would be subject to the requirements of the zoning ordinance, so
Okay.
we're not reviewing signs as part of this approval,
Thank you.
or consideration, sorry.
Anything else? Okay, thank you. I'll open up the public hearing for anyone who would like to speak on this case. Make your way up to the microphone. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and turn to commissioner deliberation.
Another question, is this currently vacant space? Well, I don't have any other questions, but my comment is that I appreciate that applicants targeting this neighborhood as a way to build on their mission and the work that they do and engaging the community. So I think this sounds like it would be a good use for this property.
Yeah, I think activating it, while it may not be as active a use as what would typically be desired in a TBA, I think it is reactivating a space that isn't active now, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness related to transparency and making it welcoming for folks to see into and come into and hopefully activate that block a little more.
I think it might be worth noting as well that this block is not the block where the BRT station is on.
Thank you.
That would be the block north. So when we talk about transit-oriented development, that might be something else to consider.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm happy to make a motion. Okay.
Is there a few other thoughts on the appropriateness of the use?
I'm in support of it. I think with their interest in engaging the community, I think it is in line with the intent of the zoning ordinance when we talk about active uses. Certainly they are planning on actively engaging the local community. And so hopefully that translates to how they use the space and it becomes an active space. even though it's not sales or retail or some of the other uses that we typically see in this environment.
I wasn't going to say anything, but this is like the second, maybe third time this has been brought up. I guess I'm kind of confused. What are they doing? I heard the term engaging the community. What's happening here? I mean, yeah, it's a nonprofit organization. They're connected with an organization in Honduras. I got that. And
You mind sharing more details of your plans?
It's an excellent question. Thanks for asking. So we do not plan to use this building to offer services to the community. We hope to engage the community to think about what does it mean to do justice and why does that matter, and how can we look to Hondurans who are leading the way, which is not typically the case. Usually it's a first world country that's leading the way for a nonprofit. How can we look at what they're doing to reform their systems to inspire us to look at our systems in a new light? So in the past, this has looked like giving a presentation and talking about what does it look like to care about the public healthcare system? How could we work with government officials to make that happen? Why is that important for all people who depend on the public healthcare system? And how can we come together as a community to make those systems improve? So less of a use of offering actual services and more on coming together around a collective desire to make this community more just.
so mainly just education. If I want to look at other systems in the world and figure out how can we do it better here in this neighborhood, I could contact your
Yeah,
organization.
education and advocacy are the two biggest pillars inside that strategic plan.
Got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And because they're not providing services to the community on site, that was one of the primary considerations for why we determined it was more general professional office, meaning that it would have their staff there doing work versus providing services to individuals in the general community, which would be in line with the social service definition.
Okay, if there are no other comments, I will make my motion here. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the special land use and site plan review request of JV Enterprise LLC, Leonard Van Drunen, to establish a ground floor office use for a nonprofit organization in an existing building at 2037 Division Avenue South for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the proposed use will support the South Division area specific plan recommendation for adaptive reuse of existing building stock for a mix of uses, and support the Community Master Plan Chapter 5, a strong economy recommendations by utilizing an existing vacant building, which will encourage additional investment and activity and will better enhance the potential for future retail use. The proposed use will meet site plan review standards of Section 5.12.8.e because the proposed office will utilize an existing building that was designed to reflect TNTBA site and building element requirements, and access is immediately available to sidewalks and the street. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment because the proposed use will support the desired mixed-use character of the neighborhood by offering an office use that will complement other nearby uses. Potentially adverse effects arising from the proposed development on the neighborhood and adjacent properties will be minimized because the existing building is appropriately positioned on the site and is consistent with the requirements of the TNTBA zone district and available on-street parking, off-street parking, and transit. The proposed uses will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare by reason of excessive traffic noise or visual clutter because anticipated office traffic will generally be low, consisting primarily of employees in the daytime office use is not expected to produce undue noise and activity. The proposed use will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or otherwise hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment because the arrangement of the proposed building and site are intended to encourage an active street environment. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the financial stability and/or economic welfare of the city because the use is not anticipated to create nuisances that will require additional city services, and occupying a vacant storefront for the use will enhance the financial stability of the neighborhood. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard conditions set A, approvals, which is shown on your screen, but I will also read that the application and plans submitted by the applicant and signed, dated, and stamped by the planning director shall constitute the approved plans except if plan elements do not meet ordinance requirements and/or as amended in this resolution. That the use shall operate according to the application and per testimony as recorded in the Planning Commission minutes. That this approval does not include any proposed signs, and any future signs shall be subject to the requirements of Article 15 of the ordinance and permits received prior to installation. That a land use development services or LUDS permit, building permit, and all other required permits be obtained from the City of Grand Rapids prior to construction, demolition, or operation. That any expansion of the approved special land use requires an additional special land use review and approval by the Planning Commission. That the proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all state laws, and that this approval shall take effect 16 calendar days after the date of the Planning Commission's decision.
Support.
We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The motion passes.
Thank you for your work.
Our next case will be 1639 Madison Avenue Southeast.
So at 1639 Madison Avenue Southeast, Gentex desires to construct an approximately 54,000 square foot light manufacturing and assembly facility, which also includes a two-story office space of about 13,000 square feet, along with an associated employee parking lot. Now, this is coming before you today because the subject property, as you can see on this map, falls into 3 different zone districts. It's an oddly shaped parcel, and I think that's partially the result of a relatively recent lot split involving 1601 Madison to the north, but it falls in the SDIT, Industrial Transportation Zone District. It's in the TNTBA Zone District, just a small portion that fronts on Madison. And then a portion falls in the TNLDR, Low Density Residential Zone District. And it's because of this split zoning, particularly the portion in the TBA and LDR, that we are here today. The applicant wishes to construct this manufacturing facility that wouldn't be allowed in the TBA or LDR zone district. So to facilitate the desired development, the applicant is requesting rezoning of the TN-LDR portion and the TN-TBA portions of the site to SDIT. In association with that rezoning, the applicant is voluntarily offering a conditional rezoning agreement that would subject the subject property to certain conditions and restrictions, limiting the future use of and development of the property. So today, I'm going to advance a little bit here just to show you that, again, this is in blue is the subject site, 1639 Madison, and the area that's hatched on this map here on this graphic is what is under consideration. We are not looking at any portion of the subject property that is in the SDIT zone district. So the reason that we are, planning staff and the applicant came up with a conditional rezoning for this project is because a straight rezoning to the IT zone district would not really be appropriate in this context. It would abut residential property, and it would be more appropriate to rezone the residential property to IT with these conditions associated with it. And the reason that it wouldn't be appropriate to rezone it to IT is that if it were, then the property could be used for any of the uses allowed in the zone district. This conditional rezoning sets some limits on how the property could be developed and used. So it would afford some protection for the adjacent residential uses. I guess I don't have it in here anymore, but I do want to mention that the property is located in or addressed in the Southtown Business Area Specific Plan. It's identified as industrial flex. And I should mention that plan was adopted in December of 2019. Now, this industrial flex area, it's intended to include industrial uses to better accommodate changing needs of industrial areas and support businesses, to support business growth, entrepreneurship, workforce training, and economic activity. That industrial flex area recommendation of the Southtown Plan was implemented in the zoning ordinance, but it only applies to the areas zoned Transitional City Center, or TCC. The subject property is TBA and LDR, so that industrial flex text amendment that we did as an overlay doesn't apply to this property. So I mention this because generally the Southtown Area Specific Plan does recommend industrial use on this property. As far as surrounding properties, as you can see, there's medium-low density residential to the south. Across the street, we have medium-low density residential, commercial, and then to the north, we have an industrial use. And here's the zoning maps. You can see that we have TNTBA along Madison, and then industrial to the north. And then everything to the south is residential. One thing I do want to mention is that as you can see here, I didn't include an older photo, but I guess I could go to the, I don't have an older survey either, but you can see this was all parking lot, or a lot of it was parking lot previously, and there was a large industrial building on the north side. It appears to me that the southern portion that's in the residential zone district may have been converted to parking under our previous zoning regulations that our 1969 zoning ordinance, which did allow the conversion of residential property adjacent to industrial or commercial areas to accessory parking. So I think that's how it got there. I don't think, it doesn't appear that it was ever zoned industrial. The subject property is about 6.5 acres in area. It includes some vacated parcels and, vacated portions of Lafayette and Montgomery Street, which are encumbered by easements for public utilities. If that's something that we do need to go over, I know the applicant is prepared to talk about that. So, all right, so this is the site plan. It's a conceptual site plan. I think this one's a little bit easier to use for our purposes here today. So in exchange for the construction of this manufacturing facility as proposed and the associated parking, the applicant is offering to provide some landscaping as shown on the plan. I'll go over that in detail, as well as some fencing. So the applicant is proposing some decorative metal fencing along the front and along the south property line, along the west, and then up to the south again. As you can see, the applicant is proposing a 25-foot landscape buffer. And that landscape buffer is being proposed in the area of construction. That is identified by this red line, this north-south red line. So sort of east of there would be this 25-foot landscape buffer between the residential properties and the public right-of-way. They're also proposing a 10-foot landscape buffer west of the initial phase of development. I'm pointing it out on the plan. It's north-south here. The intent of that is to help screen the loading docks from the properties fronting on Montgomery Street. They're proposing a new chain link and architectural metal fence in the area of development, this initial phase. So we'd have a 6-foot tall chain link fence along Montgomery and behind the properties on Lafayette and on Dickinson. Right now, I will show you some photos in a moment, but that essentially would replace the existing chain link fence on the property. And I believe that is intended to be 6 feet high. The applicant will remove the barbed wire on any fence that will remain on site. I believe that that is the area west of the initial phase of development, and yes, that's correct, okay. So they'd remove the barbed wire and barbed wire supports on that area. Uses would be limited to light manufacturing, warehouse, and office, low decibel activities, no chemicals. Hours of operation would be 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Truck traffic would actually utilize the access to Madison north of the site on 1601 Madison, and that sort of service drive will connect to the subject property. The curb cut on Madison that leads to the parking lot is only for employee parking. There would be no truck traffic there. Lighting will be full cutoff fixtures, meeting zoning ordinance requirements. The existing curb cut, there's a curb cut somewhere in this area that I'm pointing to on Montgomery, where the site fronts on Montgomery. That curb cut would be removed.
At the end of Lafayette.
Oh, at the end of Lafayette.
Yeah, the north of Lafayette.
Oh, it's right here. Okay, so sorry. Okay, it's that curb cut is where I'm pointing out. It's near the edge of the initial phase of development. The building will be constructed in compliance with all site layout, building placement, building element, and height requirements of the SDIT, and it generally does comply. There's a couple elements that I'll point out. The exterior signage would be installed in accordance with the TN-TBA zone district requirements, and the applicant and staff settled on TN-TBA because we have TBA across the street, and that would, rather than the IT, which allows a lot more signage, the TBA would provide some protections for residents. The draft conditional rezoning agreement requests a sign on the south side of the building as shown on the elevations, which I will get to. And the draft agreement does acknowledge that future development would require amendment of the agreement. There are a couple elements I want to talk about, but I first want to show you the building elevations. It might be easiest to start with this elevation here, this rendering. It's a two-story building. The portion at the front is office. And we have the entrance on the side of the building. The applicant will be able to describe this in detail, but I understand this side entrance is due to the grades on the site, making it impractical to have an entrance on the front of the building. Additionally, the parking lot is on the side, and it would be more convenient for visitors and employees. This plan does show the proposed Gentex sign that I mentioned previously. And we have a few other elevations that I think it's easiest to see on these renderings. Here's a few renderings. This is from the street. This is the north side of the building. This is the rear of the building with the loading docks. Another view of that. Okay, so there are a few elements of the plan that deviate from the standards of the SDIT zone district, and I would ask that the Planning Commission should consider these, please. So I'd already mentioned the location of the main building entrance, and that it is on the side of the building. It's on the south side rather than on the front. And so the Planning Commission can allow that to be on the side, but that might be an item of discussion. The operations portion, the main manufacturing facility, will be clad in vertical metal panel, and the Planning Commission should consider the appropriateness of the metal siding as proposed as a main as a main material. And if the Planning Commission does find it appropriate, the Planning Commission might also wish to consider whether a masonry base with a height of 18 inches should be required. That would be similar to 1601 Madison, which is to the north. And the Planning Commission does have the authority to waive or reduce those requirements. Another element that I'd like to mention, and I think the applicant will be able to talk about in further detail, is their need for the amount of parking that they're proposing. And they're proposing 95 parking spaces. 81 are within the area subject to the conditional rezoning agreement. The remainder are in the IT area to the north of that. 55 parking spaces are required. We looked at that a couple different ways, and we came out with either 55 or 56. So the planning committee, that does exceed the maximum allowed of 120% of the required. So we'd really like the applicant to talk about their employment needs and the other needs for parking on the site. Green site elements and tree canopy appear to be met and can be confirmed at permitting. And there is an element in the conditional rezoning agreement that it will comply with those requirements. The applicant indicated to staff that the chain link fence along the south and west property line will be 6 feet in height. I believe there's a conflict in the conditional rezoning agreement and the plan, and we really would like clarification at this meeting exactly what is proposed, if it's going to be coated or if it's going to be galvanized, and the height. The applicant has indicated that the 25-foot buffer, the parking lot landscaping, and the lighting have been designed to be compliant with zoning ordinance requirements. And staff has not been able to go through the photometric plan and the landscape plan to ensure full compliance, and we would like the agreement to reflect that these elements will comply with zoning ordinance requirements. I believe the plans do comply, but I think it would be a nice addition if the applicant is amenable to add that to the agreement. Regarding the sign on the south side of the building, let me find the best plan here. There we go. We can see it here. The draft agreement does mention this sign, and I think, you know, it's at this time it's conceptual in nature, but we really do need to confirm the proposed size of that sign if it is to be included in the agreement. And so we would like that to be confirmed. And we would also ask that the sign be restricted to external illumination. That's consistent with the general regulations which prohibit backlit and internally illuminated signs where a property is adjacent to residential. So that would just confirm with our zoning. We just want to ensure that the neighbors are protected. I think that's all I had on that. The Southtown Corridor Improvement Authority Board, they have reviewed this, and they did submit a letter of support. The applicant has conducted community engagement, and I'll defer to them to talk about that. So I do have a number of key considerations that are included in the staff report. So those are the things that I'd ask the Planning Commission to please consider in making their decision. Before I wrap up, I just want to advance to some of the slides. I had to take them out of the packet, so they're not on your you're not on your iPads because the packet was too big to put on the iPads. So I did put them in the presentation though, and I know the applicant will be able to walk you through these. I just want to quickly show you the condition of the site right now, what's there. And the applicant will be able to, go back to these. One thing that I did forget to mention, and I'll go back to the plan in just a moment once I get through these slides. Okay, this is the neighboring building. And this proposed building really, I think, complements this building nicely. So this is just to show you what was there. I can actually use this slide to mention what I wanted to. The plan does show that the concrete or asphalt in the LDR portion of the plan that will not be part of the construction area will remain in its current state. So substantially as shown here. Additionally, the fence that is along Montgomery, I'm pointing it here, that is also to stay in its current form. And the applicant has talked to staff about the rationale for that, but I would like them to talk about that in greater detail. So that's something that I'd like the Planning Commission to talk about as well. Do you have any questions for me before I hand it off to the applicant?
Yeah, I have a question. So it appears as though the sidewalk is being pushed up against the curb. Could you speak to whether or not that's appropriate? And it also appears that there's no street trees, and whether or not those concerns are under our purview.
Excellent catch. And let's see here. Let me... I would suggest that we do want them to install street trees. I will defer to the applicant about this design with the sidewalk adjacent to the curb, and I know that the applicant also constructed the building to the north, so there might be a reason for that he can talk about.
Any other questions for Elizabeth? Okay, thank you. And then we'll invite the applicant up to fill in the additional details.
So you can advance with this or this, and I also have this, so I can, when you're talking, I can advance to the slide you need.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Josh Strauss here on behalf of Rockford Construction, Gentex, Amplify, you name it. We're kind of up here today on behalf of everybody. So architect of record for this project in particular. I was the architect as well, too, for the 1601 Madison project, the MCPC building. Appreciate the introduction, Elizabeth, and Laura and Tyler Kent. I know we've been working with them, for probably close to 6 months now, just on this project in particular. The project in general has been in progress for a year and a half, almost 2 years. So I'm not going to take all this time up here to just regurgitate everything that we've put together in the packet today. Trying to keep it short and sweet, but answer at least some of the questions that Elizabeth brought today. Really, this is kind of phase 3, more or less, in the development of this site in general. So Elizabeth alluded to it. The old kind of Dexter Lock manufacturing building was on this site. Approximately 250,000 square feet. It stretched all the way from Madison back to Jefferson. And I mean, it really touched that south property line along Montgomery. When we demoed part of that building, we actually had to rebuild some of the residential fences. So to Elizabeth's point, I think there actually was building in LDR from that Dexter Lock facility that was there previously. So took down the building. There's brownfield remediation. This site was really contaminated. Lots of kind of dumping that was happening inside the building from Dexter Lock. So there's a lot of cleanup that needs to be done to this site in general, which kind of ties into one of Elizabeth's points about just the pavement that we're trying to leave and encapsulate the existing soil. So Phase 1 was kind of that part of the project. Phase 2, kind of getting 1601 Madison into shape. And then Phase 3 now would be Gentex and their team kind of building out a new facility at 1639 with future growth expansion to the west as well too. So quite a bit of kind of moving parts on this one. So I'll try and answer just really Elizabeth's questions and maybe open it for you guys for discussion here. Building entry on the south side, that was really critical, at least when we worked on 1601. And you can kind of see in those later pictures, and I'll see if I can scroll all the way down to those real quick. That 1601 MCPC building, the front offices are actually below grade. So the stem wall, that foundation wall, is actually higher, about 2.5, 3 feet, just to try and maintain curb cuts and not have slope, to the building, creating poor drainage, and then also still promoting walkability itself. So that's one of the main reasons we're kind of encountering that again, the further south that we go along Madison. So that's why we've kind of rotated again that entry to the south side of the building as opposed to having it on the east side. Metal siding, IMP is kind of what's on the MCPC building as well too. So kind of hoping to really maintain that cladding, that kind of decoration, that approach. We can add a knee wall. We don't have that right now on the 1639 building design, but that can certainly be added if required. But again, trying to be harmonious with really creating a design on Madison that is appealing, approachable, really kind of welcoming to residents, trying to promote walking, biking to, or even busing to this facility as well too. Sorry, I'm going to try and talk and scroll here. So. But really trying to break down the architecture, just kind of I would say the scale of the building itself, just in relation to the low density residential that we have to the south as well. So really trying to play with kind of changing the planes of that, changing materiality along the eastern elevation specifically. Next would be parking. So parking, there's a lot of plans at least for the building itself that would kind of go above and beyond just the light manufacturing use. There is a large training room on the second floor of the office portion that there's plans to host community events, job fairs. There's a lot of engagement with the public. I'll use that term again, that we're focusing on with that space in particular. But really also through the design of the building as well too, you'll kind of see we've got some art installations as well too on the exterior renderings that we've kind of been toying with some ideas through Amplify as well too, to kind of really make this facade, I would say, tactile, so that people can come up, interact with it. Is there a way that it just promotes, additional kind of curiosity to the public as they're coming by to maybe try and go in and see what Gentex is doing, because that's really all of their mantra as well too, as their team. So that parking is really critical to try and get, additional kind of community room access, but then also because there is a little bit of split on the site plan to where there's a little bit of additional parking at the loading dock area, and because of the way that the site's constructed with the buffer in Montgomery, there's really no kind of inter-site access except going all the way around Madison and to the backside of the building. So that's another reason why we're a little bit higher, just to provide a little bit more parking on that side as well too. Fencing, that was a really big piece that we reviewed with Elizabeth and her team, just kind of the treatment of that south property line in general, along Montgomery, along the neighboring residents, along Dickinson there. Again, as you can kind of see from the photos, believe it or not, even though many would think that this site is relatively flat, there is quite a bit of elevation change between adjacent residences and to this site in general. So you'll kind of see it's really kind of flat over here at the end of Montgomery and Lafayette, but as you get really into the improvement area, as we kind of keep heading to the east here, you will see that these residents are almost 4 to 5 feet above the subject kind of, I would say, grade that's existing. So again, trying to work within the parameters of the adjacent residents, to the street along Madison, walkability, maintaining sidewalks, having positive drainage, ADA access into the building. That's, again, pushing and pulling on a number of factors here to why we've kind of designed the grades to the site, but then I've also treated the fence and the landscaping in the way that we've done currently within the plans. From there, photometrics, I know that we worked really kind of diligently with our electrical engineer on having everything from the building. So we really tried to prevent having any light poles, I would say, if I can get back there quick enough, to the south, basically in the 25-foot landscape buffer. So we're really lighting and meeting all of the photometric calculation requirements from the building face itself, and we're not having anything on the south side of the parking lot or in the landscape buffer, again, to further kind of prevent us from being a nuisance to anybody to the south that may have a rear-facing bedroom window or anything to that matter there. And then really, kind of the last piece would just be the signage. We will submit for a separate sign permit. So if drawings need to be amended as part of the approval process or just deliberation process here, we would be willing to do so to kind of show a smaller scale sign or even further notate drawings or conditional rezoning agreement for that matter. Really, I guess I just want to respond to the questions, but I can't stress it enough. The team that's sitting to the right of me here is just really excited to bring this project to the community and to the city itself. So there's been a lot of moving pieces on this one, so I'll kind of cut my spiel there and say, hey, if you have any questions or if you need anything else on my side, please feel free to fire away.
Okay, I just had some clarification and around the parking lot. So I read through the due care plan, where the parking area is. Nope, the southern, yep. Is there continuing monitoring, groundwater monitoring there? Soil gas vapor, is all that being done on that particular slab? So that's where the high concentrations are located?
Correct. So,
Okay.
So to clarify, I guess, that point, we would love to keep this part of the site that we're not developing encapsulated.
Sure.
And full remediation will be done to the extent, I would say, is kind of this green kind of background. So pretty much everything, I can't zoom in on it, but we've got initial phase and future phase at that red line.
Okay.
So remediation will happen everywhere to the east of that red line, and then to the west, we'd want to continue to monitor and then encapsulate.
Okay.
To not allow any disturbance to what is there still.
And is that part of the, so I'm trying to articulate this in the right way. So you want to maintain the parking lot, what's there, but are there any areas of cracking or, escape happening from that groundwater there now? Because it doesn't look like that it's in great shape, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not in the greatest of shape. We do have SME coming out routinely
Okay.
to continue to check the site to make sure that we're following all protocols and that we don't have to make any major deviations or site improvements to make sure that everything stays encapsulated.
Right.
I would say most of the basements that we encountered from that due diligence plan were to the north. So a lot of the basements and kind of press pits or areas that were just recessed into the existing building to the north primarily were basically filled and then removed anything that was in those. So I would
Okay.
say at the 1601 Madison building itself, we probably had a good 8 to 10 feet of undercutting for that building that needed to be done.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. They have, you can, yeah. That was it. Thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
I'm so sorry if I missed it, but did you clarify whether the new chain link fence is going to be coated with epoxy or, you did, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't.
Oh, you didn't?
No, I
Okay.
didn't. So thank you. I appreciate that.
I saw Kyle nodding and I was like, I'm so sorry.
I thought I had all of them, but I forgot that one. It would be epoxy coated. That would be the intent, to have that a little bit more residential in nature as opposed to being industrial or abrasive. Still want the 6 feet tall on that fence as opposed to 4 feet. As you can kind of see from some of the photos, there's a significant amount of kind of site dumping that's happening at the end of Montgomery. There's a gate there currently. This has been rammed a couple of times by cars trying to access the site. There's obviously a couch that's right there, and then just a ton of other debris that really kind of ebbs and flows. It gets a little bit greater in terms of the summertime when obviously the trees are full and there's a little bit more kind of privacy or shading or screening by the landscape there. So we're hoping to still maintain at least the 6-foot height in that fence that's there. Correct. So good point, Bob. The location of this fence is staying, but you can kind of tell, I'll flip through these photos, there's a tree that's partially through that fence right there. Gosh, as I keep going, there's a chicken coop that's in these photos too. But this fence is just completely, and it needs to be replaced more or less. So it's hard, I guess, however we want to split hairs to what to call it specifically. It is a new fence, but in the same spot more or less. And maybe there's a couple of modifications to work around the existing trees or some of the existing kind of landscape features that are there. But it will be all new pretty much in that side.
Okay. And then I want to confirm that I heard you correctly in that you are amenable to having the 18-inch masonry around the hole.
We are, yes, we are.
So to belabor the fence issue, you're saying that everything east of the gate and east, new fencing will be 6-foot epoxy coated. Everything west of that gate will be, your desire is to leave the existing fence as it is, removing the barbed wire and support structure.
That is correct.
Okay,
Yep.
and you wish to keep the pavement, the impervious surface, to keep it encapsulated due to the due care plan. What would prevent you from improving the streetscape along that edge? Presumably, when that pad gets developed, you would be constructing from the inside, not from Montgomery, since it's a residential street. So what would be preventing you today from reconstructing that streetscape as part of this project, since you are keeping the existing fence, or you're requesting to keep the existing fence and keeping the existing conditions of that area?
I think it would just be still that we can access the south side of that building. Now, there would be, from a constructability perspective.
Okay.
So we would obviously be able to construct it from kind of the north side picking to the south there, but you still want obviously over excavation in that slope for your footings foundation. So the intent would be to develop a building right up to kind of that 25-foot orange dash line that we've established as the 25-foot landscape buffer. But obviously you over excavate 10, 15 feet past your foundations. So we would tear into that landscape buffer and,
I'm not asking about the landscape buffer, I'm asking about the streetscape.
oh, the streetscape itself.
Yeah, the sidewalk does not look like it's in good condition. The street trees might be something to talk with our city forester about, but it certainly looks like there's opportunity to reconstruct the streetscape piece of it.
Yes. Yes, there could be some opportunity there with further discussion on city engineering. I assume that was outside of our property and in the public right-of-way at that point?
You're correct, it's in the public right-of-way, but where we have redevelopment, it is part of the city policy, it is the responsibility of the development to redevelop the city streetscape up to city standards.
Okay. Yeah, and we're already touching it to remove that curb cut anyway, so we're getting into that in a partial capacity, so to continue would be.
Yeah, and I think in light of the choice not to install the landscape buffer as part of this project, it seems like a reasonable upgrade for the city streetscape, understanding that there's conversations with the city engineer, of course, still.
And then one more question about the parking, the need for as much more parking, more than the maximum that you are asking for. I mean, this is served by the one bus line that goes past when you're proposing shifts to be done. It also is, at least on the east side of the street, part of the e-bike and e-scooter zone. So like, in general, like how are you promoting multimodalism with this project? If you're asking for more parking than the maximum.
No, it's a good question. I think that with Gentex's current facility that's at 355 Cottage Grove right now, they're still trying to navigate patterns of just employment. So this would be their second location within the city. Most of their other locations are in Zeeland right now. They've actually had, employees that live in this zip code that they have been then transferred to that Cottage Grove location. So they're promoting kind of that close proximity walkability with some of these locations. So it's just understanding what that new pattern is and where is the employee draw. They're still trying to figure that out. And then in addition, shift change as well too, and the job fair. So I think that they're anticipating kind of a real big clogging at that point of time of day when there is a shift change or when there's additional job fair community events that they're having within that room. So I hope that answers enough of it. I could let Scott come up here from Gentex and maybe elaborate on it if you want a little bit.
Sure, yeah, I guess what I'm hearing is that we don't know exactly how much parking we need, so we're asking for more just in case.
So, Scott Ryan, Vice President, General Counsel at Gentex. So thanks for everyone's time and the questions today. Sure, there's a little bit of the unknown, right, as Josh was just mentioning, with this new facility. But we do know from our other operations and how we engage with the community and hold events that parking can be a premium and difficult at times. I'll just kind of emphasize the shift change, as well. We try to stagger the shift changes on the lines as much as possible, but you can only do that to a certain extent. So you got, the people coming in and don't want to be late for their shift and have to be out on the floor. And then you have people that are working right up to the end of their shift, and then they got to get time to get out of the building. And that's where we usually see, the most, the busy times in the parking lots. And we want to prevent people from trying to, park in spots where they shouldn't be. In addition to, again, some of the other community efforts, that we're trying to accomplish with this location. But if you go back and look at one of the fundamentals of why we wanted to start this project, it is trying to take down that transportation barrier. So our hope is that every employee's not driving, a car to work, that there is walking or public transportation, there is the e-bikes or other mobility. And we do want to encourage that, and that's really kind of the core of one of the reasons we want to do this project. But at the same time, we want to, we're designing this based on our experiences of all our other facilities to ensure we don't, build a building and then don't have enough parking for everyone.
Just to, I guess, further drive this point home like we did with the fence, if it's a possible solution, we could propose at least a scaling back of the parking lot with leaving at least a portion of it to the full extent that it's shown on the plans as future. So maybe we could come up with some sort of solution that way to kind of propose maybe a reduction slightly in the parking itself, but then also still have that future expansion area, because if it is truly a need for them as they figure out hiring, traffic patterns, that we would still love to have the right to at least expand and add that parking at a future date.
Can I ask how many employees per shift you'll have on site? Do you know?
Yeah, be around that 40-ish.
Yeah, around 40 to 50.
Okay. Thank you.
The renderings show a gated parking lot and a gate from the road on the sidewalk approach to the entrance. Is that a locked gate, always closed? You mentioned inviting the public to engage with the building, come in, see what Gentex is all about, but having the gate there doesn't feel super welcoming.
That is a big piece that we are still navigating, at least even with MCPC, the 1601 Madison building to the north. Currently trying to figure out specific products that will be manufactured in this building for Gentex in conjunction with MCPC, who's actually expanding, growing, and continuing to add more products. Those contracts for those products state certain security requirements for those. So we're kind of sorting between the two sides right now, and we'd appreciate at least a little bit of leniency right now in the rezoning effort to still continue to work through those to present something to city staff for what the final version of that fence and gating looks like.
I have quite a few questions, but I'm going to start with the parking question. I feel like we've run into this in the past where if you're above the 120%, you have to demonstrate need. Are we subject to those requirements in the zoning ordinance as part of this discussion, or is this outside of that? I can't remember the sections. I could look them up, but.
Yes, you're subject to that. I think the ordinance does go on to talk about a parking demand study. We have not required that for developments that are smaller in scale versus a parking structure downtown, for example, where we've had massive overages for proposed call center, for example, downtown, where we have different infrastructure in place. We've held that parking demand study. For developments like this, we've asked them to demonstrate need with an understanding of employee shift change, training components, things like that.
Thank you.
Did that help, or?
Yes.
Okay.
And then for you, I would really appreciate it if you could clarify what's being proposed for some of these situations. So there appear to be a number of discrepancies between the site plans, your building plans, and the renderings for the project. A good example would be there is a lot of landscaping along the Madison facade in the renderings, and it does not show up anywhere in the plans or site plans or landscape plan. So I would like clarity on what's being proposed because it is not currently clear. I also, I want to question the grade issue. According to your site plan, the grade is sloping down from the highest point, which would be your finished floor elevations, which is the reverse to what you described to us and having to bury it like the other property. You are showing what appears to be an outdoor seating environment or something along those lines along the street, which would suggest that you can, in fact, have a street entrance, which doesn't align with the description that we've been given. So I would like clarity on that and how that's supposed to work. Along those same lines, the fence that's shown on your floor plan is different than the fence for that seating area, or what I'm assuming is a seating area. It's different than what appears to be a fence that's across the whole front of the building on the landscape plan. It's really difficult. So with these kinds of things and with us talking about walkability and landscaping and everything else, it's very difficult for us. Generally, you're held to the documents that you show us, and if the documents aren't saying the same things, I'm not exactly sure how you can be held to the documents that you're showing us. So I would like clarity on all of those discrepancies, please.
Sure. So we are still working through a lot of these elements with Elizabeth and city staff. I guess I would like to question maybe the true intent of at least the rezoning efforts, and if those specifics need to be completely detailed within our proposal, at least for now, or if that's something that we can continue to work with on the city staff side to further define, develop, and come up with a final version of the plan that fulfills all of the requirements. So we've been kind of exchanging a lot of back and forth over the past couple weeks, which is why we tabled last month to come to this month. So trying to work through kind of getting everything aligned, all of the specifics. So to really answer the questions, though, the landscape plans are the one that govern per the zoning ordinance. So the conceptual site plan that you're seeing here on sheet A1 and the exterior renderings, those do not show the true nature of the landscape that's currently proposed. It is the actual architectural landscape plan. In terms of the grade, that is just at least what we've worked through thus far. There is still some kind of posturing of driveways, access, and how that fully works out. To your point, There could be a little bit of modification that would allow that entry possibly to shift a little bit further down. But at least from what we've experienced, especially by trying to maintain that right of way and the sidewalk as close as we can to the building, we haven't been able to have that entry there. And we can continue to work through those details with the civil engineer to make sure that we're having proper slopes, and if there is a possibility to change that entry door to the east side of the building itself. In terms of outdoor seating, we are planning on having that. The fencing plan kind of shows that fence line that's at the parking lot dying into the face of the building and then encapsulating that outdoor seating area. So I'm forgetting the question, I guess the specifics of it, but maybe it was tied in relation to grade and about how can that occur if the grades are really that poor.
Well, there's a lot going on, but like the plan that you have up right now just shows a fence going right down the front of the building that's 1.5 feet, 2 feet away from the front of the building. That doesn't align with your floor plan. So again, what are we approving, right? Like, are we approving this plan? Or are we approving some combination of the multiple plans that you have? That was the question. Hopefully that's clear. The grade comment was that you appear to have a door at grade on the street, but you were also telling us that that's not possible. So there's something wrong there, and I would like clarity on that.
Yeah, we can continue to work through the grading plans to further identify where that entry door is and clean up the landscape plans to get those to align.
Sorry. Can you also, I brought it up earlier, but can you explain why you've chosen to push the sidewalk all the way up against the curb, not have a planted area or any street trees, which would typically be required for projects within the city?
That was just what we maintained, at least with 1601. So we kind of followed a similar rhythm or pattern that we were doing with the MCPC building, whether that is right or wrong necessarily. But that was just the thought process that we had with MCPC, and it was approved for that one. So we kind of maintained the similar course. Again, willing to adjust if needed for this building, since we are getting into more of a little bit of a tricky site on that side.
My recollection is that when the city redid Madison, we're very challenged with the lack of area that could be dedicated to sidewalk space. And when you look at the block immediately north, there wasn't substantial room to have street trees and the sidewalk, so it was an alignment issue. Also, my recollection is in front of MCPC, did I say that right?
Yeah.
There is a utility line that was relatively close to back of curb, and so the decision was to allow for that sidewalk to exist and then allow for the private landscaping to function similar to what the streetscape would be, because we were not able to get adequate streetscape due to the proximity of the utility lines.
There's a massive drainage line that goes to that access to the north of the MCPC building that actually, like you alluded to, crosses diagonally from Madison under that northeast corner. And I think it's I want to say a 36-inch diameter line. Yep, you can kind of see it in the upper right-hand corner there of this. I'll kind of put the cursor up to it right here.
So we often have friendly battles in our design team about what streetscapes can be implemented based on the street segment, the utilities. So my recollection is that we were concerned about alignment. Disability Advocates encourages us to have straight sidewalks so that we don't meander from one section to a next to the extent possible. And then, of course, utilities don't like trees above their lines. So sometimes we end up, Bond Street is another one, where we pull the trees and landscaping to the other side of the sidewalk, sometimes on private property, to help balance those issues.
Any other questions for the applicant at this time? Okay. will open up the public hearing for anyone who would like to comment on this case. You may make your way up to the microphone. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and turn to deliberation. And perhaps we can start with Director Turkelson clarifying the status of documents, perhaps. And then we have a condition that says that the plans as submitted by the applicant signed and dated and stamped shall constitute the approved plans. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, I think that is subject to the agreement that is also in place, or would also be in place. I think that there has been quite a bit of back and forth between city staff and the development team to make sure that we're trying to reconcile the agreement with the plans to the extent possible. I think that I would agree that there's additional work to be done. And so we do have a May meeting, so if the Planning Commission isn't comfortable with some of the progress we've made to date, knowing that there's still the City Commission process, that we would have additional time, I should say, that we could do, get your feedback and make sure that the plans are better reconciled before they go to City Commission. Alternatively, if you feel that you're not certain what you're approving, then we could ask for some additional time, table, and come back for the May 9 meeting.
But because this is a recommendation about a rezoning, do the standard conditions apply?
No, the conditional rezoning are the conditions of the rezoning.
I see. Okay, I understand. Okay.
I guess I'm feeling less discomfort than maybe some of my colleagues with the renderings. I mean, the overall project, I think, is going to enhance the area. We know, particularly it's brought home to us, that we have a very low amount of industrial space left in the city, and this is one of the corridors that's been underutilized. I think this building complements the building next door. It's got clean lines, a lot of transparency in it. At least in the front end, as you usually, you like to see in industrial buildings. It adds jobs in the neighborhood, in a growing industry. So, I think that the rezoning is going to give, I think you called it some industrial flex, really does help work with modern industrial building and being a strong, good neighbor, as they're want to do, it sounds like, by taking down fencing, barbed wire, and, a lot of other things that exist there right now. So I am comfortable going forward, and I look forward to hearing other discussion and thoughts from my colleagues here.
Yeah, I'm in support of this project. Just from my own personal knowledge of the level of contamination in this on this property, to have and being that this is in a residential area, this will allow this heavily contaminated piece of property to undergo some cleanup and protection from the community, or for the community, I guess I should say. And not to mention, I think it's I like to see the industrial component staying within our city. I think it's very important. I think this, even if it attracts some of the community, it's providing jobs. I'm in support of this project, and I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate that the conditional rezoning tool exists for us, because I wouldn't want to have just any industrial use be possible here, as decisions go with the land and not who owns the land. So I appreciate that this exists so we can, like, based on their voluntary agreement, ensure that no industrial activities are occurring here that will produce negative impacts on the community as it relates to excessive noise and odor and emissions and chemicals. Because we definitely, like, the residential is right there. And probably a remnant of some systemic racism in the past in terms of, like, putting industrial right next to where folks are living. So I appreciate that the conditional rezoning tool exists, and I'm also in support. I do appreciate the offer to at least have some sort of staging on the parking, just to see what's necessary and what's not. But yeah, I am excited about the possibility of some jobs that could be here that people can walk to and bus to and bike to, and yeah, in general, very supportive.
I just want to echo that. Generally, I'm very in support of this too. I like that this is an industrial company that's right in the neighborhood, obviously trying to do right. Keeping the contaminants out of the drinking water, keeping it away from the people who live close by is extremely important. We all seen the pics. I think the nicest thing that we can say is this site is a hot mess, and so we're glad that somebody is coming through to clean it up and get it in shape. For the parking in particular, I work night shift, and I can say that generally was the issue, right, during the change of shifts. It takes 10 minutes to walk from your car to the floor so you can be in place when you need to be in place, and it takes that same 10 minutes for people to leave their station to get to their car. So, you know, you need to be parked and out of your car, 10, 15 minutes before your shift actually starts. So I do understand the need to have more parking there because of the change in shift idea. I also really like the community training, having that space. Is that space available for the community? I don't think I heard that. I think I just heard community training. Okay, it's available to the...
There's been a little bit of a discussion about how to possibly utilize it, rent it out, or what does that look like, right? So
Got you.
I don't know if it would be necessarily immediately open to the community, maybe more of a phased approach for Gentex to understand staffing, hours of operation, but the building floor plan has been designed to almost isolate that space so that you can't get into the rest of the building.
I like that. Yeah. I love those aspects. It definitely opens up doors in the community. The other thing, I guess, I would say is to echo Commissioner Bryan. We definitely want to be approving the plans that we're approving and not back and forth between 3 different ones. So however that works out, I'm sure it'll work out. But I am generally in support.
Yeah, I would say I'm generally in support of the project. Love to see this coming into the neighborhood. I do have some concern, like Commissioner Swem mentioned, just incongruencies even in the presentation of what was happening versus what's shown on the prints. And I don't know how, right? Like when I read through the conditional zoning that we're actually approving, if we're approving that document, I'm more comfortable. If we're approving these plans, I don't know what we're approving quite yet on some minor deviations. But one thing that, I saw was the lighting. The lighting plan that's shown with the site lighting shows lighting all along the south side of that parking lot, even though we were presented with a statement that we were not going to be doing that and all was going to be coming off the building. So there's some of those little details that I do feel like need to get worked out, and I'm not, I guess I'm sure I can get comfortable with that being worked out at a later date, and I'm not sure how yet, how that happens and whether these prints that conflict with one another in some small areas are what we're actually approving, or are we just approving a conditional rezoning based on the text of that zoning? Those are different things to me.
So you're approving both, and I think we can appreciate the challenge that there are discrepancies between the agreement and the plan. I think that, May 9 is 2 weeks away, so that's an option certainly, is if the Planning Commission is feeling uncomfortable with those discrepancies being worked out administratively before it goes to City Commission, then certainly looking at a 2-week table to have that reconciliation between, I'm looking obviously at all of you, because I don't know what impacts that has to scheduling, but I think that there's, I'm sensing at least 3 of you have mentioned some discomfort about what are we approving.
Yeah, I guess from our side in conversations with Elizabeth, we even stopped making changes earlier this week based on discussions that we had with her, stating that some of these elements didn't need to be formally flushed out for at least the Planning Commission meeting today. So I guess that's where I'd like to pose it back to at least Planning Commission or city staff of what is the level or nature of the rezoning agreement, and where do the plans need to be in alignment, specifically still allowing for obviously a full city engineering level review with these plans. That new water line has to be continued all the way down to Eugene from Madison. It's been capped and looped right now in the fire lane access. So, and then continuing, we're going to build that road all the way through as well too. So as we continue to work through those major swatches of elements of just city engineering coordination, I feel like there are going to be some of these elements that we're proposing as part of this conditional rezoning agreement that will change slightly. So I don't know what level of detail, I guess, that we need in the plans thus far to completely flush out and align. I guess maybe just throwing this out there as a possible solution, do we need to get maybe a little bit more reconciliation around the entry, the Madison front face of the building, possibly to alleviate maybe some of the questions, concerns, in addition to the photometric plan, or I guess I would say cleaning up, to possibly maybe focus on those 2 pieces for getting in again on May 9th if needed, if we can't get to approval today.
I'm not uncomfortable with the side entrance, and it's consistent, I think, with the building next door. And I understand you've been working on this for 6 months, and there's still, of course, going to be more refinements made. Personally, I'm comfortable with that. I think the staff knows, where some of our concerns and other areas, but I'm comfortable with them overseeing that instead of having this to be brought back again. That's my feeling.
Can I say something there? I think it's less those particulars for me, and more so, can we just get all of the paperwork to say the same thing? I think, at least that's where I'm coming from. If we can just get all the documents saying the same thing, is more geared to where I'm at.
Oh, so yes, and that would certainly be our intent before it could go before City Commission, is to get those reconciled. At some point when we're prepping for a meeting, we do have to stop. We can't have plans keep changing when we've got to get staff reports out. And so unfortunately, there has to be a line. And it sounds like it was maybe this week where we just can't keep adjusting, especially when it then results in discrepancies between the staff report that was published on the Friday, and then you're getting revised staff reports on the Tuesday. I think for us, landscaping, fencing, getting your guidance on the entrance and the building materials and the parking. Typically, outside of the discrepancies in the plans, those issues, I think, are, you've had confidence in staff to reconcile those issues. And I am confident that we can do that again before we go to City Commission, so that we have clean plans because you're recommending body in this case, before it has that final approval. So I think that this is doable. I think it's unfortunate that we are not at that place for you to see, but we have a good sense, because we too have been working on this for several months. We have a good sense for what is being proposed, meaning I think the uses, the agreement, the general building layout, the site circulation, all of those, what I would consider significant details are consistent, they are understood, at least from my perspective. And if, because you're not seeing this for the length of time that I am, you may feel differently, and that's okay. But all of the major items that I would otherwise be concerned about, we are comfortable with. It's some of the details that I agree should be further along than they are today, but there's still time for us to reconcile that with a little bit of direction from you, and obviously some work from the applicant before we get to the agenda with City Commission.
I appreciate that very much. So some of the things that we talked about that, based on Elizabeth's notes in the staff report, that are in the plans but weren't necessarily included in the agreement for the conditions of the rezoning, included addressing the metal siding and the 18-inch masonry base all around. It didn't necessarily outline or specify that the intent of the fence is to be 6 feet tall and coated in epoxy, and that the landscape buffers and wood and lighting and all of that would meet the zoning requirements. So that's all what we've heard today, but wasn't necessarily documented in that. And so is that something that we can, if we were to recommend approval, is that a condition that we could or could make?
So I'll let Mr. Hooker correct me, but I think that would be the direction. The condition, I don't think it would need to be a condition of approval because the condition is the agreement. So you'd be requesting an amendment to the agreement that would address all of those items. Is that a good way to put it? Yeah. Okay.
So I'm in support of the use on the site or the conditional rezone. I think when you look at the fact that Montgomery has been vacated, among other things, the fact that it's zoned LDR doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't work as LDR. So I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm also comfortable allowing staff to work through some of these issues that we've identified and outlined. I would really hope that staff could take the same amount of people first mentality that we've had in other discussions about housing and other things, in really paying attention to what it's going to be like to walk past this thing and whether or not it is promoting walkability in the neighborhood. I think that the street relationship or the facade along Madison and landscaping is important, and I understand the engineering concerns for not having space between pedestrians and cars, but I'm not necessarily convinced that that's a good reason to put people right next to the curb. I also, to the south of the site, it appears as though we have one of those jogs in the sidewalk. So I think whether the jog is between this property and the property to the north or this property and the property to the south, I think that that's worth talking about. So I would just encourage staff to continue to consider how this building affects the neighborhood in general and how it addresses the street from a people first mentality. Another thing that I would like to note is that I really, there was a lot of buzzwords flying around today, a lot of communication around walkability, multimodal transit, lots of words. Everything that was designed and shown to us doesn't align with those words. So I would much rather know for these applicants and future applicants, I would much rather know the real reasons why we're doing things and not the reasons why they think not the reasons they think we want to hear. I am confident that there's not a grade issue along Madison. The grade change is 2.5 feet over 142 feet. You wouldn't even need a ramp with a 7-foot grade difference along the length of the front of the building. So there are, I just want people to be honest so we can have a real honest conversation about what we're trying to accomplish and whether or not it aligns with the city's goals. Thank you.
I agree with a lot of the sentiments that Commissioner Swem just laid out. I agree. I have no concerns about the use here or the flow of traffic internally on the site. I think it's a good reuse of a very large vacant lot, and I look forward to the continued development on the site. I don't feel super strongly about whether staff works through some of the discrepancies or if it comes back for us. I understand the frustration, though, about the language being used and what's being presented. You know, that's why I asked about this gate. It appears to be locked. I don't know. I don't know how it's accessible to anybody. But in general, I'm supportive and I'm comfortable with the rezoning now, or the conditional rezoning. But how we work through the issues, I don't have super strong feelings about.
Also, as an engineer, I get frustrated with plan issues. I think we have had some that we've sent back to the applicant, and it's actually made for better projects, so I'm not afraid of that. In this case, I personally would be comfortable with the staff working through the process without it coming back. That's where I'm at.
I'm sorry, side note, unrelated, comma. Does the public know that that land there is contaminated?
I don't know the requirements of doing that, but, you know,
I'm just
past
curious.
use of it and whether it's been cleaned up.
I guess I'd look at, oh, Christine left. Nate, do you know that when land is contaminated, is there any sort of notification process from the state that is in place? Or my assumption is, let me introduce you to Nate Williams. You've seen him before, our stormwater engineer.
Oh, my cousin, of course.
Nate, can you talk through what that might look like?
Yeah, from a public-facing regulatory standpoint, the contamination on site when it goes through the EGLE process, in this case through the Part 201 and Part 213 corridors of which are just sort of specifications of the type of contamination in the department in EGLE that would deal with that sort of thing. It is all publicly available, so reports that are channeled through EGLE, some of the testing that is done, it's all kind of posted onto their website and some of their mapper tools. That being said, I'm not aware of any like mandatory reporting that EGLE does to, like a 100-foot radius or something like that. I want to say no. But I'm a little ignorant as to their type of public notification or lack thereof. I know it is publicly available if you have to ask or if you want to look something up, but I don't think they necessarily go out of their way to advertise that sort of information.
I'm not aware of any notification process of we found contamination, and then let's communicate that more broadly.
Okay, just was curious. Thank you.
Thanks.
I would agree.
Do you want a motion, or are we still in debate here?
Well, let's see if there's any further discussion.
Okay.
And then maybe procedurally, what does a motion actually look like? Does it include like an itemized list of interests from the commission, or does it just reflect the discussion in the minutes?
Yep, so one of the awkward dances of the conditional rezoning agreement is that they have to be voluntarily provided. So in other words, we would need to make sure there's concurrence by the applicant of any changes or conditions as part of this. And so that makes it a little bit more awkward, so it might be better to itemize it, determine whether there's concurrence or agreement to make those changes within the document. And that's why I said it's awkward, because the Planning Commission cannot impose conditions on them that are not agreed to as part of the legislation surrounding a conditional rezoning agreement. Do I have a list? I believe so.
So we can't just say reflected as per the discussion, because, there isn't, I don't, there were a number of things brought up. I don't know if we're all in agreement on each and every one of them. And how do we create this list other than what's reflected?
Well, I'm just curious. I'm assuming that the answer is no, since we're talking about it, but a number of things were volunteered prior to us hearing about it. So I'm curious if there's an opportunity for things to be volunteered following, if they're working with staff, as
Right, yeah.
it seems like people are okay with. So I know that's a weird little nuance, but also trying to leave it open for staff to work with them without having to come back and do this again.
I guess I would like to add that this is all still a draft. It's not finalized. So it hasn't gone through the city attorney process yet for full review. So yes, there is time to still make changes, adjustments to further align with plan, or add additions, or subtract sections that don't align as well.
Yeah, I'm going to have to comment. This is Bob Nolan with Warner Norcross. We represent Gentex. And yeah, we've been working on the conditional rezoning agreement with staff, and we had it down to a few things, and we'd even said, just like you said, Ms. Turkelson, that at some point you have to say, okay, well, we'll get further comments and we can buff up the conditional rezoning agreement per any further comments. And that's where we had left it. So, yeah, we're glad to hear, and we'll take good notes so we can make sure that staff's, or staff carries the mail, and we'll get it to where the staff has it comfortable.
So then my list would be that you would agree generally, you would agree to align and reconcile the plans with the conditional rezoning agreement. I think that probably goes without saying. Do you agree to amend the plan and the agreement to provide deferred parking? Am I wording this right, Mike? Yeah, okay. Stop me if I'm not. Do you agree to provide deferred parking?
Can we call it future? Or I guess deferred?
I mean,
don't know what the right term for it is.
Deferred parking is a nuance in the ordinance that says you don't have to build it now. You can come back and work with city staff in the future when you can determine that the demand is necessitating the construction of that parking. Without coming back to Planning Commission. Correct. Because you're showing it in the plan. We would just be identifying parking, I believe it was that north section, if I remember correctly, as future deferred. Oh, it's a portion of the southern.
Good, okay. They are good with the north.
Okay. Oops, sorry.
I guess my question for that would be, what, I think my intent in terms of deferring would be to not exceed what's allowed now unless it were warranted later. So I don't know how many spaces are in that north, whether that's appropriate for cutting or how much we're over and if that is accommodated there, so.
We can run through the full calc. If it's north and maybe 2 spaces for the southern part, yes, we'll reconcile that calculation.
That it was spaces above the 120%. Yep. That whether you'd agree to amend the Montgomery streetscape to be brought to city standards as a condition. This feels super awkward.
Josh, we're looking for a head nod at least.
I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Verbal's better.
Yes. Whether you'd agree that the architectural elevations would be revised to include a masonry base.
I see a head nod.
That there was, well, we've already talked about reconciling the plans, which would include the fencing discussion that's already taken place. Did I miss anything on my list? I realize I heard Brian's comments about the walkability and the gate. Is there an ask that we would have around that
I wonder if it is more of a general to take steps to make sure that the public spaces around it are welcoming and pedestrian friendly. I don't know. That gate thing gets me, and I don't want to micromanage here, but I agree that it does. It's just this big barrier, but I don't know the operation. Maybe it's open during the day or whatever, but I hate to be too specific.
this is going to be specific, that primary entrances to the building are not impeded by gated access?
I'd want to hear from the developer about that. Is there a reason?
Yeah, so the gate is there for security purposes, and some of the products we currently make and in our product roadmap, do have different federal requirements from a security standpoint. CT-PAT being the big one. That's a big part of our import-export, for import for raw materials, export for finished goods. So the gate is designed, there could be opportunities if we were holding an event or something, we could choose to handle that security differently and leave that open, but we're not in a position today to commit that we can leave that open during business hours or anything like that.
I did wonder about that, so thank you for the explanation.
Is that the real reason for not having an entrance along Madison Avenue? I mean, we've heard that there's a grade issue, and yet every plan shows a door right on Madison Avenue, so I don't think it's actually a grade issue. Do you want the entrance behind the fence? Is that the real problem?
Well, we do have security for, the reception, area and security to get into our facilities. To speak to the grade issue, I got to defer that to Josh.
Okay.
No. Yeah. There is no door on Madison, I guess. There's just storefront windows. The renderings may possibly depict a door that has been...
And the floor plans.
Oh, to the north side there. Okay. Yeah, we were trying to possibly open that up with basically all overhead doors at one point in time to create indoor-outdoor access. Those have since been removed as part of coordination with the grade. So we'd have to take a second look at those with civil engineer again to fully understand. But architecturally, it makes it easier from an access perspective to put that front door to the south to then encapsulate and basically have that within the controlled measures of the fence itself.
Yep.
I'm kind of having a change of heart. I kind of think that this should come back to us for a final review. Changing my mind. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, just with the list that we've gone through and to make sure that we're all in the same level of understanding, I'm happy to make a motion to table until the March 9th. So just give a couple weeks, or May 9th, sorry. Let's go backwards in time. Just to give a couple weeks to make sure that you are actually in agreement. This is a voluntary agreement, and is that okay?
Yes, there were a couple other things that I wanted to add.
Well, I think if the Planning Commission's inclined to table it, do we need to go through those things, do you think?
I was going to ask that a little bit, side note, comma.
Can we propose that we just meet with staff and get that list
Yeah,
clear?
love that.
On the fly here.
Yep.
That would
All right.
be my preference.
If we table this and then and then we bring it back, do we have to have the presentation and conversation all over? Okay, wonderful.
No, Commissioner, we would stay focused on what's changed, what's been addressed, what updates. Yep.
Okay. Just to make sure I'm making the motion correctly, we're going to making a motion to postpone to the May 9th Planning Commission meeting. Support?
Support.
Kyle.
We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The motion is postponed,
Thank you.
approved to postpone. We will take a 5-minute break, and then we will invite the Grand Valley students up. let us resume. Welcome.
Y'all ready? Okay, great. My name is Professor Chad Frederick. I'm from the Grand Valley State University's Department of Geography. The Department of Geography and Sustainable Planning. The program as it is now is about 6 years old. We haven't worked with any Grand Rapids government agencies yet. We've worked with Eagle, Ottawa County, Hudsonville, and some others, really trying to get ourselves organized before we started tackling these bigger issues in Grand Rapids. It is a geography department, and as you may or may not know, there are 3 different academic disciplines which you can get a planning degree. There's architecture and the design and aesthetics. That all makes kind of sense, right? Then there's public administration. Of course, I'm sure you're probably familiar with that. And also geography. So you might ask, like, what do geographers have to do with urban planning? We do spatial analysis. If architecture brings the aesthetics and public administration brings the rules and regulations, we bring the scientific analysis. One of the first things I show my students on the first day of class is the MPEA and the MZEA. And it says, cities are allowed to zone so that we can do this. And our question is, okay, that's what you want to do. Does it do it, right? Do these policies really increase economic opportunity, quality of life, public health and well-being, all this other kind of stuff? So we apply scientific principles to analyze spatial phenomena, and that's what we're going to be showing you here today. So with that, I think, are you guys all ready to go? All right, I'm excited for you because this is the first time we've been here, and so I'm really kind of pumped. Okay, well, I'll leave it to you guys. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Evan McCarthy. I worked with Lorna and Max, and I will be talking to you about associations between the Grand Rapids built environment and urban accessibility within the city. So just a quick overview so we can kind of get our footing. We're going to be talking about the original request that was provided to us from the Grand Rapids Planning Department, going over some loose methodology so we have a understanding of the methods that were involved in our case, understanding the current Grand Rapids situation, moving forward into our empirical findings, and finally looking at opportunities for the city moving forward. So the request from the Grand Rapids Planning Department talks about what are the potential impacts moving forward with the community master plan, right? Whether it's economic, whether it's social capital. We decided to focus on traffic and transportation, as that is the access that residents and other interests have within the city. So we wanted to focus on which variables can we even get data for, and what methods can be used for pretty exploratory research. So some methodological principles to be familiar with as we move forward, as we answer this question, is that there was changes in geography. So from 2010 to now, at the census tract level, a lot of the census tracts have split due to population size reasons. So it's important to keep that in mind as it influences some of our data, as well as the level and unit of analysis. So keeping in mind that we are using the census tract, which is a proxy, if you will, for the neighborhood level. So we had to be selective with what years we were pulling our data from. So we used 2013 and 2022 to pull in some temporal analysis over time. We chose those specific years to avoid potential disruptions from the Great Recession as well as COVID influences. And it's important to keep in mind that although these large-scale events do have an effect on smaller scales, different geographies have different relationships, and that can get extremely complex very quickly. And finally, it's important to keep in mind that correlation and causation are not the same. Just because certain variables in instances correlate does not mean they necessarily cause each other. So first up, kind of bringing some of your own rhetoric back with you so we're in line with it. We're focused on creating connected and diverse neighborhoods within the city. That has been a focus for a long time, and it continues to be a focus moving forward. Access to the city is being a part of that diverse neighborhood. You can't have a diverse neighborhood without it being accessible to all those within the city. So first we need to talk about what lens we are viewing the city as. So we see the city as a sustainable system. So cities such as Grand Rapids are complex systems of people, places, and lifestyles. Systems such as cities have properties that can be measured, such as resilience, robustness, redundancy. Diversity is what we were focusing on as the primary variable for sustainable systems. So diversity is the variety and richness of that system. It is the strength of that system, right? So cities like Grand Rapids specifically lack housing diversity in the form of the popular term kind of coined by Paralek, missing middle housing. There's a lack of diversity in housing choices throughout the city. So Again, looking at the built environment and transportation, it's important to keep in mind that we know academically that these two principles are extremely intertwined. So increasing housing diversity decreases automobile-dependent trips, increases walking and busing. So transportation must also be diverse to meet those diverse housing needs, those diverse transportation needs. And increasing urban system strength in cities such as Grand Rapids must address both of these issues, both separately and together. This graphic shows that almost two-thirds or a third of the population finds driving in a single occupant vehicle inaccessible for a variety of means. So we need to design our cities to be accessible for this other third of the population. So first up, what is missing middle housing? If you guys aren't familiar, it is a term for the housing that rests between single unit housing as well as those larger complexes that we see increasingly prevalent throughout the city. They help match shifting demographics such as younger families or older empty nesters. It brings more accessible housing units for everyone, as well as it supports transit and higher access to local amenities. So it's cited that 10 dwelling units per acre is needed to support local methods of transportation, which is something that we don't see throughout a large part of the city. So this is a view of the current Grand Rapids housing diversity, and I will have this on a bar chart for you on the next slide. So single-family homes on the left are about 60% of what the city has to offer. That missing middle is about 20% of what the city has to offer, which is increasingly unavailable. As well as the upper missing middle, so those townhouses, multiplex mediums, and triplex stacks, or even live-work environments are extremely rare throughout the entire city, and those large complexes are about 15% of what the city has to offer. So stacked all together, we can see the prevalence of each housing type throughout the city. So we can see that single unit housing dominates 2/3 about of all the housing stock, as well as there's low amounts of missing middle and extremely low amount of upper missing middle housing. So it's important to keep in mind that the single unit is just one unit. Missing middle we define as 2 through 9 units. Upper missing middle is 10 through 19 units, and those larger complexes are 20 plus units. So this is where we bring back those 2013 and those 2022 data sets. So out of the 48 census tracts in the city, referencing the number that was present in 2013, 20 tracts increased in housing diversity, which means the other set of tracts are staying stagnant or decreasing in their housing diversity. And over the city as overall, we see a decrease in housing diversity, measuring that missing middle housing from 22% to 21%. And upper missing middle housing decreased slightly, but to the same extent as missing middle housing. Dwelling units per acre, so out of the 48 that we measured in 2013, 28 increased in dwelling units per acre on average per year. This is largely attributable to those large 20-plus unit developments. Since we see that middle decreasing, yet we see those larger complexes increasing. So increases in dwelling units per acre is due to those larger complexes and not that missing middle. As well as throughout the city as a whole, we see an increase in dwelling units per acre from 2.86 to about 2.96. So modal diversity, this is modality throughout the city using non-personal vehicle means. So out of the 48 census tracts, 24 or half decreased in automobile commuting. So that means the other half are increasing or staying about the same. So the city is making progress in their modal diversity. However, there is a little change throughout the city. It's positive change, but not a whole lot. And commute times is something similar. So out of the 48 census tracts, 23 decreased in mean travel time to work. So we're seeing similar trending to modality throughout the city. So overall, we're seeing very little change en masse throughout the city, but it's important to keep in mind scale. The city is large. So we focused on census tracts 7, 8, and 9, which correlates to the northern West Grand area and the western Creston Heights area that showed positive trending in everything that we measured. So we see positive trending in diversity measures and dwelling units per acre measures, percent non-auto commuting, going to work, as well as decreased mean travel times to work. So this band throughout the city, as you can see right there, is showing improvement in all the variables that we're measuring for. So overall, what I have to tell you is that increasing dwelling units per acre across the city does, and it is proven to improve transit-related outcomes. However, those large units are inadequate they don't provide the same benefits that that missing middle that the city is sorely lacking do. So changes to the new community master plan will not noticeably change the face of the city, but will help improve some of those statistics that we're measuring for, such as through Census Tract 7, 8, and 9. And Grand Rapids has seen a slight decrease in housing diversity en masse on the city scale, but that just leaves more room for diversity or housing diversity improvement in the future. It leaves more room for more improvements, as well as focusing on that missing middle and that upper missing middle. So I wanted to talk to you about some limitations of the study that we did. So we need to keep in mind that cities are complex and causation is difficult to establish. So as we go through, we can only focus on a certain amount of variables because the more you add, the more complex things become. And we wanted to keep our scope precise so we could accurately communicate our results to all of you, as well as there are scale-specific data limitations. So only so much data. We primarily focused on this, the Census Bureau. Only so much data is collected at the census tract level. A lot of things are captured at the city scale, the MSA scale, or the county scale. Not everything is captured at the census tract or neighborhood scale. As well as we had to spend a lot of time going through very large files provided by the Census Bureau. So that was a huge time sink for us that we enjoyed going through, but limited the scope of our research. So talking about our research, future research, so with more time, correlations can be deduced between limited variables and causation can be established, as well as factoring large-scale events and trends could lead to more definitive relationships and even stronger relationships. For example, how many housing permits are issued versus the units built can be factored into our measures of diversity and use of that diversity, as well as we could develop more robust statistical models. So here are an extensive list of our references. And again, thank you for your time and your resilience this afternoon. I'm Evan. Our contact information is here, and I'm willing to take any questions that you guys have as of right now before we move on to the next group.
Any questions for Evan?
What account or were you able to look at on transportation, time, and things like that, and the causation, I think, by COVID that more people work from home? Was that in any of your considerations?
It was. So are you comfortable if I go back to where I talk about that? So modal diversity, in the measure of modal diversity that we used, the Census Bureau does collect this information on the census tract level. So what we did was combine the percent of commuters who don't use their car and do not work from home. Because they are not traveling throughout the city, we didn't want to measure them in our modal diversity measure. Although I'm sure that does factor into the way people do interact with the city. However, when talking about the ways that housing diversity impacts the way people access the city, move throughout the city, we wanted to focus on the people that were moving through the city daily.
In your conclusions, you state that the changes to the community master plan won't noticeably change the basic nature of the city. Can you say more about how you came to that conclusion?
Yeah, so I'm going to bring you back to Census Tract 7, 8, and 9. So this band right here is showing improvements in housing diversity, modal diversity, commute times. Have any of you noticed any massive changes in the way that these portions of the city work or look or feel? A lot of residents don't necessarily report that their neighborhoods are completely different, that the face of the dwelling units per acre increase is impacting their way of life noticeably in a negative way. It draws attention to the fact that missing middle housing and upper missing middle housing is something that has been present in cities as long as people have been living in cities, and about since right after World War II, since we began to focusing on like single family, single unit buildings, they've begun to disappear, but they naturally exist within our city, and they already are within our city. They're here, and an increase of the missing middle and the upper missing middle doesn't change the way that the city works. It improves on what the city does. So I hope that answers your question.
But in terms of like the specific corridors you're looking at here, like there have been developments that could contribute to the mode shift that you are talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I kind of get to the complex nature of city and correlation and causation. So these areas have seen increases in housing diversity and increases in dwelling units per acre. So it's extremely hard to control for the exact developments that are happening on the census tract level, as well as like citywide commute data. But these areas, this band is showing an increase in housing diversity and is seeing a noticeable increase in the amount of people who aren't using their car to get to work and who are getting to work faster in a more convenient manner.
Can I just poke it real quick? Causation and correlation, very important thing to keep in mind here. All we can do as scientists is say that there's an all we can do as scientists is say that there's a statistical association. We can't say one's causing the other. We need more robust methods for that, more statistical analysis, different kinds of tests and stuff like that. Multi-level analysis, for example, right? Factor analysis, another kind of technique we could use. But given the time constraints here, right? So as scientists, we don't like to say this is causing that unless we're absolutely sure, right? And so we see a strong association, but we don't see anything like definitive, like if you put in this is going to happen. We have the theoretical support from the literature in the field of geography, and we have some empirical support in terms of data. But again, to say that this CMP back in whenever we did it, and these kind of changes to the built environment caused these, we're not really going to say that. But we will say that you should be comfortable with going ahead with making housing more diverse in Grand Rapids. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any more we can?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job. I'm going to give us a deadline of 3:50, so that's another half hour.
They're all about 5-7 minutes long.
Great, thank you.
All right, hello there, guys. I'm Alexandra Jorans.
I'm Ashton Gluck.
I'm Aaron Bigelow.
And I apologize, we might have to move a little fast because we have somewhere to go, but we'll get into it. So anyways, now that you guys know about missing middle housing, we're going to show you how we applied it and how you can find parcels. And so we're tasked today with looking where to add missing middle housing in Grand Rapids. So the planning department's request from us was basically to expand on vacant parcel maps to show where plexes and pre-approved plans could be built, and large lot vacant redevelopment ideas. So our objectives today are to build a methodology to give you a step-by-step on how we found these parcels. We did this by creating a decision tree, and we also created maps, and we also provide examples that are in Grand Rapids today. So then we started with looking at parcels, and we actually looked at census tracts because it was providing us more information, which is good. So majority, well, our goal is to have sustainability within our community. And our overall goal is to provide full benefits of diverse housing. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Provide auto-dependent areas with increased emissions and compact areas with more walkability. So basically, where to put a lot is more important as to what is being built.
I'll step in here. So renovating old buildings and sites can be much more efficient and sustainable way to add missing middle housing. Reed Ewing states that households living in developments with twice the density, diversity uses, accessible destinations, and interconnected streets when compared to less dense neighborhoods drive about 33% less. And then in the book Happy City, Charles Montgomery describes that using already developed infrastructure is much cheaper than developing new areas. And the EPA recommends that the residential density should be a factor considered for location efficiency. And the EPA also informs that investing in development near transit infrastructure saves residents money and encourages healthy habits and by providing alternatives to automobile travel. And a walkable community engages the public in the space around them and heightens community involvement. Social capital is important because living and working in close proximity builds trust through social relationships, and this social capital built through those relationships improves many aspects of life. An article for the National Institute of Health, Kevin Layden states that not only is social capital good for health, empirical linkages have been found among social capital, the proper functioning of democracy, and the prevention of crime and enhanced economic development. Julian Egeman describes the importance of place, stating that a walkable community enhances a democratic process as intermingling strangers can debate policy. And then, according to the Pattern Book of Homes, which the city looks to use as development for the vacant properties, creating new multi-unit housing within existing neighborhoods will contribute to the variety of housing choices. It will increase financially attainable options and foster the persistence of residents of all backgrounds and socioeconomic statuses, as well as creating a strong economic core that improves property values. These are our methods that we use to gather our data, to gather our mapping data. We got information from the EPA Smart Location Mapping database, and then we use the vacant parcel data that was received from Dew Point, a consultant for the Planning Commission. And then to compile our maps, we used ArcGIS Pro 3.1.1. And we began the process of finding the best vacant parcels by creating this decision tree. The first box ensures that the parcel is less than 1 acre, and then we chose to look at census tracts where gross residential density is more than 5.23 housing units per acre. This allows us to focus on tracts where missing middle housing adds more utility. We then looked at census tracts where walkability score is greater than 15.5, and because if you build missing middle housing where nobody walks, there's no solution to automobile dependency. The next variable we applied was selecting census tracts where the distance to the nearest transit station is less than 525 meters. And these three variables ensure that the new residents have ample access to public transportation, that they are able to walk for necessary trips such as grocery stores and work. And once these census tracts have been chosen, we then used the vacant parcel map provided by this Grand Rapids Planning Commission, and we found 3 parcels that we believe would be a good example as vacant parcels to develop for the city.
So one of the recommendations made by the APA was that missing middle housing should be implemented in neighborhoods with high residential density. This ensures that the new housing is contributing to areas that have the potential to be more multimodal and livable. The denser neighborhoods have more potential to benefit from missing middle housing than the less dense ones. So as you can see, in the center of Grand Rapids has higher dense neighborhoods. Walkability is one of the greatest contributors to a high quality of life for residents of a city. Walking imparts benefits such as physical exercise and increased accessibility to various land uses and errands. Missing middle housing is best implemented where the new residents will use other forms of transportation than cars, but this won't happen unless there are viable alternatives. So as you can see again, walkability is higher in downtown Grand Rapids. And then continuing with the theme of reducing automobile dependency, missing middle housing should be built in neighborhoods served closely by the rapid. Also, transportation and housing cannot be treated as separate problems. If housing is built away from the transit network, then the transit will have to be expanded in the future to accommodate the new mass of housing. However, if housing is built in proximity to transit, then more resources can be applied to improving the existing network. Areas in Grand Rapids may have the proximity to transit that the best cities in the country do, but one of the biggest shortfalls is regularity. So strategic placement of missing middle housing can improve this. So we began, this is not going to work. Yeah, I don't think. Well, we began by using the Select by Attribute tool to find all census tracts that have 5.25 housing units per acre or more. This created a map that had 42 census tracts. It is unfortunately hidden behind the other 2 maps, so that did not work out. So then we used a second tool, the Select by Attribute layer, to add to the 42 census tracts to show the walkability of over 15.5 and the 5.2 housing units or more, which gave us 14 census tracts. And in the end, we added a final selection to show census tracts with the 2 previous layers and the final variable, with census tracts that have distance to nearest transit less than 525 meters. So this is left with our final map of 11 census tracts that we believe are better on focusing on individual parcels. So these census tracts we chose. So within the 11 census tracts, as shown here, there are 83 vacant lots according to the shapefile provided by the Grand Rapids Planning Department. Of these 83 lots, we narrowed down to 3 lots we believe have the greatest potential for new missing middle housing units. Each lot is walking distance from a grocery store and 2 are corner lots. We do believe that there are other great options available as well, but the 11 census tracts should be really focused on to find more lots. Not only should vacant lots be looked at, but also dilapidated or abandoned or vacant housing that could be repurposed and reused into missing middle housing. So overall, there's lots of space within the city to add new missing middle housing. Really, it fits nearly anywhere, but there are census tracts that are better suited than others. We have provided you with 11 census tracts that we believe should be focused on for the search to add new missing middle housing. By adding missing middle housing to these neighborhoods, there may be some specific benefits that the residents will have. There will be an increased use in public transportation by adding more housing with residents that are less likely to have their own cars. Social capital will be increased as residents living in close proximity will create bonds that are less likely to be created with single-family housing. And developers creating this housing may be able to use tax increment financing to be more willing to agree to build it. As mentioned above, or previously by Aaron, often residents are not against this type of housing, so there shouldn't be much pushback from the current residents. So the graph on the right shows that the housing demand will be increasing through 2025. So while there are lots of new units, that does not often mean new builds. A new parcel map should be created including vacant lots that may work for missing middle housing, but also including rundown, abandoned, or vacant houses that could be repurposed for the missing middle housing. While more time and effort being allocated to this research in the future, there is a possibility of creating a more refined tool using more variables and with different criteria or thresholds being chosen. While we only had 1 semester, if this were to be worked on continuously, we're certain there would be more missing middle housing added in the right places within the city. So thank you for your time, and this is our information if you have any questions.
Thank you. Do you see developers adding any other layers to their decision-making when they're looking for help on parcel selection?
I think that would be pretty close. Maybe I should ask our developers or architects there, but I think that is very closely aligned with what we would hear as well.
I remember asking if we had an inventory, and I think this is a great first step in having, you know, whatever way you work with economic development or other realtors or whomever, well, you have good relationships with developers to be able to identify some sites, and then who knows what other kind of incentives, but at least it puts us, besides determining that we need more housing, actually showing some examples. I really appreciate the work.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
The Planning Commission is especially interested in using a pattern book of homes, which the MEDC produced with the Michigan Municipal League, and it has examples where they can actually buy a pre-planned home, place it on that property, and match it to the neighborhood characteristics.
Wow.
So that eliminates a lot of the costs of developing the property, and it helps smaller developers get into the process.
Great.
In theory.
They actually want to use Grand Rapids as a test study to go through the rest of the state. I know Detroit just did 3 properties that were the first ones on.
Yeah, I saw that. Yes.
Yeah, we've developed, or are in the process of developing several pre-reviewed plan sets. So I think that there's, oh gosh, don't quote me on the numbers. I think it's 4 single-family, 4 duplexes, and maybe 2 or 3 quadplex developments, or plans, pardon me. Of course, there's still the, finding the property, making sure it's properly zoned, that it has adequate site size to accommodate. So there's still some additional steps that would need to be taken, but the goal is to exactly what you said, where we have permit sets that are generally ready to go from a building permit perspective, understanding that there's still a few layers there.
Do you have any cities that you would point to as a model for Grand Rapids to try to follow?
I know there was another group that had done some work on a city in Virginia, I believe, was it? Arlington. Had done some work on missing middle housing. So I believe there's a plan for an Arlington website that you could look at for this.
Okay, any further questions or discussion? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good work.
All right. All right, hello. My name is Adela, and I helped to create this presentation with my group partners Ella Carr, Michael King, and Maria Van Eerden, who are all here today. The focus of our presentation is on communicating with Generation Z, and this is towards an engagement toolkit. So we were given an invitation from Grand Rapids Planning. We were invited to assemble a toolkit to address issues communicating with and engaging with 18 to 24-year-olds. To do this, we identified barriers to communicate with Generation Z, and then investigated methods to address the barriers, and finally made our recommendations. We feel it's important to note that a toolkit is still an exploratory research. While we have attempted to assemble a toolkit, it is not entirely complete. We do have some recommendations that we feel will improve engagement among Generation Z, and we did provide a definition here, and this is our working definition of what a toolkit is and what it should include. So first thing is first, in-person public participation is good by all means, but largely it is not valid. Even if you were to have an event that had 1,000 attendees, that is just 0.05% of the city population. Even if they were to have 100 such events, which is nearly impossible to do, we'd still only reach a maximum of 5% of the population. However, this isn't an issue just about numbers, it's also about representation. In theory, the meetings that we have now should represent the public, but the current structure tends to attract mostly middle-class, white, retired, and older individuals who are comfortable and less impacted by change. We can find this through some documentation given by Strong Towns in 2018, and also some specific documentation talking about does the public meetings actually represent the public? This lack of diversity that we see now means that our efforts fall short in truly representing the public. No amount of tactics can overcome this barrier. As a result, small but vocal groups will often challenge decisions, leading to delays and perceptions of arbitrariness, which is a problem in Grand Rapids. So valid participation should be well publicized. All parties should have easy and equal access, and all participants at the meetings are to be consulted about their opinions. Those are the basic foundations of what a good in-person public meeting could look like. It's also important to note, however, that that still would not be representative unless all participants are a random sample that accurately represents the city. The way that public meetings currently are structured, that's just not possible. So moving on to things the city can do, we looked specifically at social media. While social media may seem like an obvious answer, it is not always the end-all be-all. Posts made like this with minimal text, shown as the example post on the slide, could prove to be effective in gaining traction for surveys or other forms of engagement. This particular tool may not reach all 18 to 24-year-olds, but it has the potential to still reach wider audiences. Keeping social media posts short with quick updates creates engagement. The planning department also does not specifically need to have its own social media department, but instead could piggyback off of the audience that the city of Grand Rapids already has. Social media can be a way to provide transparency to the community. Currently, the results of engagement rounds are shared at planning and commission meetings only, which are not highly attended. The meetings are usually live streamed and posted to the City of Grand Rapids website and Facebook, where fewer 18 to 24-year-olds spend their time compared to platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat. Those two platforms would be great to host live meetings and post recordings or links to the website. Posting short summaries of commission meetings on all of these platforms would allow more people to know what's going on in the city easily without having to specifically seek it out. Additionally, using the platforms we discussed to share updates and milestones can create discussions on social media, which is another location that people can discuss their preferences for the city. This is something that the city of Kansas City actually does extraordinarily well. They have a Twitter account that narrates data, gives graphics, and talks about personal stories of people within the city, and it helps keep people engaged in the platform regardless of if they're there to specifically look at planning content. So this is an example of the pie charts from the Grand Rapids Master Plan Engagement Round 3. We think this could be just a great example of something that could be posted onto social media to show people what their fellow members of the city are thinking and create discussion and also potentially further engagement in further rounds. Moving on, we looked specifically at the Grand Rapids Youth Master Plan. It created a youth commission that helped to develop and give input to the master plan, but ultimately it seems the plan has failed and is no longer used, partially because the goals were too broad. One common problem found across youth master plans broadly is that meetings are not engaging to youth, which discourages them from coming. They tend to be far more adult-oriented and focused. While the Youth Commission has ended, the Mayor's Youth Council is still a great tool for increasing interest and civic engagement among youth. So we recommend that that program be continued, and specifically that the Mayor's Youth Council have more of an input on public planning. This is an important way for planners to show that they value youth stakeholders and build trust and ongoing relationships with the youth. We looked at methods. In order to understand community participation in Grand Rapids, a multimodal research strategy is required. Literature reviews provided context and an understanding of previous experiences, while discourse analysis reveals the complex nature of community conversations. We combine these results with comparative analysis to suggest inclusive strategies that are consistent with the ideals of the community. When combined, these research techniques give planners the ability to jointly design a future that represents all of the viewpoints and desires in Grand Rapids, not just for those who have the time to show up to a meeting. So one thing that we truly need in order to engage the youth is a large shift in the paradigm. The good news is that this change holds the potential to establish lasting institutions and programs capable of reshaping the culture of participation in West Michigan and Grand Rapids. Leveraging e-participation specifically can help propel the public up Arnstein's ladder of participation. That is the graphic shown on the right side of the screen. And it's specifically about helping to engage members of the community up to higher levels from simply not participating or having minimal input to directly having citizen control and proposing initiatives to change the city rather than just allowing the city to make suggestions and hearing how people view them. Next, we looked at the Grand Rapids Master Plan Round 3 engagement to see if we could find anything to critique in here. It included a wordy 6-page document to preface an online survey. This is not something that 18 to 24-year-olds want to read or likely will. In addition, the activity does not have explicitly clear instructions that one should read the document, which would lead to confusion in those who simply skipped it. The technology issue that we identified came from attempting to complete the activity on a mobile device, specifically an iPhone. Towards the end of the activity, when the ward map was opened, which is a part of the online engagement, all responses were erased, wiping away the last 15 minutes of valuable time that had been spent completing that activity. Young people specifically are not going to do this again, and it may have contributed to low engagement from 18 to 24-year-olds in round 3. Moving on, looking more closely at the content of that document, the 6-page document discussed before, the phrase development character could have been replaced to more easily understood language. Words such as redlining and nodes were not defined or used within a context that explains their meaning. The language used is important. If the department uses terms that the audience wouldn't fully understand, a suggestion is to provide easy to understand language or definition documents and social media links or content that can help explain what those words mean, rather than just relying on the citizens to find that out for themselves. The blurry image shown near the bottom of the screen is a document or an image taken directly from the 6-page document. It's meant to help people understand ADUs and other housing types, but the words on the graphic cannot be made out, so it is essentially useless. Next thing we focused on was smart participation to promote community engagement. Specifically, we used a study that shows that using the public for data collection is a highly effective method to gain more long-term and interactive engagement. This is especially true for digitally fluent folks, such as Generation Z. Data was collected easily in this study through OpenStreetMaps, which allowed community members to present their findings with image, text, and location to establish their priorities and problem areas. The Grand Rapids Planning Department should utilize these methods to create a vacant or underused parcel map, as discussed previously, develop a missing middle housing database, identify problem areas along 28th Street, and more broadly to engage anyone with a smartphone at any time, rather than requiring them to show up to a meeting or read a long document. This type of engagement allows almost anyone to participate, and more importantly, it helps to build a long-term relationship between the planning department and the community that it services. Another thing we recommend is utilizing local colleges, trade schools, and universities when trying to see an increase in young people coming to these meetings, specifically reaching out to these organizations or to different class or department heads where their students may have an interest in this, such as public administration, geography, ENS, could be a highly effective way to get more students or more young people in general to show up to these meetings. Additionally, we would recommend contacting training programs and trade schools to give workforce development to participants, and which could also lead to more involvement of young people. So we created an overall toolkit with 3 varying degrees of commitment and difficulty. The first is simple, low-cost tips that we also would expect to have the least significant change. That would include getting a TikTok account, also potentially an Instagram account. When using planning jargon on social media, link to explanatory videos. Ensure that mobile devices can complete engagement, so we don't see another issue with the round 3 engagement not being able to be done on an iPhone. Publicize feedback and results on social media so people are up to date on what's occurring, and continuing and publicizing on ongoing outreach to Generation Z. For the next step up, we would see these as structural adjustments that could be more effective, changing language used to be accessible by all rather than using the planning jargon and linking to a video explaining what it is, finding alternative language that could easily explain it without having to force participants to do their own research. This could also include having it more multilingual options available, and this also could include focus group testing to see if the general public understands what these things mean. Next, we recommend, as previously stated, engaging local universities, community colleges, and trade schools directly. We recommend creating an advertisement budget to target city residents rather than just relying on social media or word of mouth. We would also recommend maximizing town-to-gown relationships, doing things such as sending surveys, documents to universities to test products to see how engagement is going. Specifically, we were thinking if the planning department had been able to send some of these round 3 engagement surveys to different schools in the area before releasing it to the public, we could have identified the issue of not being able to submit on an iPhone, and that could have led to more usage among Generation Z and just people in general. Our final category is a paradigm shift, and this is what we most strongly recommend as an attempt to accurately represent the city rather than just continuing as is with minor improvements. This would utilize public data collection as discussed before, allow for community-led planning initiatives, hold consistent engagement meetings and surveys rather than on an ad hoc basis or as needed, having regular engagement monthly or bi-monthly rather than just when the city needs something, or having this type of meeting here, which is generally not very accessible to the public. And lastly, we recommend recreating a youth master plan that is accurate and utilized to teach and engage people before they become 18-year-olds and are therefore harder to reach through the means that the city already has available. Specifically for our recommendations, the ones that we most strongly recommend are publicizing outreach efforts on social media, utilizing technology for data collection as discussed before, holding regular engagement, adjusting language, and lastly, increasing transparency by making sure that all of the data that is collected by the city through engagement is able to be accessed by everyone. For what else can be looked at, coming to people where they are rather than requiring them to come to us, having regular outreach and engagement as discussed before rather than only as needed, and effectively sharing results. These are all things that could be further looked at and further researched to find more effective ways to do them. And then this is our contact information, and we are here if you have any questions at all. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments?
Thanks for I really appreciate your presentation. I don't work for the city, but I work for another organization that is always trying to engage young people, and so, yeah, would love these slides. I do also want to mention that Mobile GR does have TikTok, so if you're not following them, you should.
I would just echo that. This almost reminded me of my own political science classes, where every day we're talking about how do we get more citizens involved in the political process, and obviously here that's always the goal. That's usually the conversation. How do we get more people involved? So I definitely appreciate the research and appreciate the slides. There's definitely a lot of easy, kind of quick things that we could do here. I think sometimes the hardest part is that when you're not 18 to 24, it's hard to do them well, or in a way that attracts the 18 to 24. And so that in mind, I generally appreciated the presentation. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. I am aware of the time constraint at 3:50. I wanted to thank you all for your time, your commitment, your resilience. I was wondering if it would be okay if I could leave some closing remarks. Our professor had to leave for some family circumstances that came up in the moment. Would that be okay with everyone? All right. So he wanted to, first and foremost, thank you all for your time, your consideration, your comments, and questions. He's super grateful. He's put in a ton of work with all of us throughout the years. He's absolutely wonderful, and he's just hoping to have a greater presence within the area, within the city, hopefully with you all. He wanted to emphasize the effect that missing middle housing, kind of the thread that has tied together a lot of our presentations, is something that has existed in cities, like I talked about, since people have been living in cities for thousands of years, and not having that diversity, if you allow me to plug my presentation again, within cities is a new advent. It's something new, and it is a return to the way cities always have been. And he has personal research that he wanted to talk about how it improves economic mobility, it reduces economic inequality, it promotes economic development, it's good for public health outcomes and walkability, working through the city. It just helps cities do what they do best. So Again, closing remarks, he wanted to thank all the students we have here. He wanted to thank you guys. I wanted to personally thank you guys for your time, and I hope you guys have a wonderful evening and a great weekend coming up. So thank you.
Yep, our thanks to you and to Dr. Frederick as well.
Of course.
Yeah, thank you. When Chad first reached out, first of all, he was very helpful in getting a lot of students engaged in our, was second or third round? Round three. We had quite a few students come to our open house nights, and I really appreciated him reaching out and his willingness to partner. I told him that we called it a capstone class at Eastern Michigan University, and it was one of the most relevant, helpful experiences because it was a real project that we got to work on, and I learned a lot. And when I went to the class, I did ask them if they would be willing to come and present to the Planning Commission, because one of the lessons I have learned is I didn't know how much public speaking I would have to do and how nervous, and it's just gut-wrenching at times, right? And you get nervous and then you stumble on your words, and we all still do that today, not being professional speakers. And so I really encourage them to go through this exercise, this piece of it, because it's going to challenge them, or probably did challenge them, to be prepared. It's one thing to put together a slideshow, and it's another thing to organize your talking points, and then also to get up and stay on point with your talking points. So I really appreciate it, and I commend all of you for doing that and doing it very well. And we really appreciate the feedback that you've given. A lot of great insight for the Planning Department to consider and helpful to the Planning Commission. So thank you. And there is parking validation, if you didn't notice, just outside the door, so please feel free to use that.
Unless you rode the bus or biked or walked
Unless you did that too.
or scootered.
Then there's no validation, sorry.
I don't know what the process is. Do I just turn off Google Slides, or?
We'll take care of it. Thank you.
I'd just like to acknowledge that the City Commission passed the housing text amendments.
Yes, thank you. So the City Commission did hold their ordinance consideration on the proposed housing text amendments that you provided them back in January. You'll note that there was quite the process in terms of a committee of the whole briefing that I did in early March. There was a public hearing at Commission Night Out. There was an opportunity for the City Commission to have a conversation or a discussion in early April to really consider all of the feedback that both Planning Commission and City Commission had heard throughout this process. You may have seen, I called it an FAQ. I don't know that that's entirely accurate in the frequency, but any question that we did receive through this process or comment, we turned it into a question and provided a fairly lengthy document, but I think it's very helpful. It wasn't necessarily specific to the code itself, but more of the impact. So if you have a chance to read that document, I think it was very well done. Kudos to my colleagues for helping put that together, because it definitely expanded beyond a planning and zoning department. And yes, so on Tuesday evening, City Commission did unanimously approve the proposed text amendments. So within the next month or so, we would expect those to be effective. I mentioned during our lunch portion business meeting that the Planning Department is going to be looking at establishing metrics to identify what does success look like. We'll share those with you for feedback. And then finally, looking at some communication tools about how do we convey what's been changed, and if an individual property owner wanted to utilize the amendments, how would they do that and navigate it? So we've got that top of mind. So congratulations to all of you, and thank you for your work and your diligence. Probably one of the largest package of text amendments that you've had to work on, and certainly, I think, incredibly impactful to our city. Thank you.
Indeed, and our thanks to you and your team.
Thank you.
Any further discussion for the commission?
Public comment?
And then, as is our custom, we'll open it up for public comment for anyone who would like to address the commission. Seeing none, we'll close the public comment period, and we are adjourned.